Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mon Kurian, going live today from Tiju's Academy, Tiruvalla. Hope all of you are doing good. And let's start today's session. So today I'll be discussing about IELTS Speaking Part 1. As you know, that's your warm-up session and what all we need to do and what we don't need to do. So the do's and the don'ts of Speaking Part 1, that's your warm-up session. So let's start today's session. Okay. So speaking part 1 lasts between 4 to 5 minutes and you'll be asked questions about familiar topics such as your job, studies, your family, home, hometown and hobbies, etc. Notice that these questions are all about you. It's considered easier than the other two parts because it's much easier to talk about yourself than more abstract topics. But that doesn't mean it's not important. So warm up, as you know, warm up namakkellarkku ariyam, it's the ice breaking session where the examiner is going to ask you some questions about you, your family, your home, your hometown, hobbies, what you do and what you don't do. So here it's just that it's so simple questions that you feel it's boring and you won't be enjoying those questions because it's a daily type questions that's asked to you. But that doesn't mean it's not important. Okay, let's move over. So 5 do's and don'ts to make sure that you don't start your speaking test, that you start your speaking test in the best possible way. So 5 do's and 5 don'ts to make sure that you start your speaking session, your test in the best possible way. So first let's start with the do's and then we'll go ahead with the don'ts. So Aditya endana? Know what to expect. So as you enter inside the examination room and you should be ready. You know what's going to happen now. So you will probably be a little nervous and you don't want any surprises that will make you even more anxious or nervous. So you must be aware of exactly what will happen when you walk into the room. Before part 1 begins, 4 things will happen. So that session, your warm-up session തുടങ്ങുന്നതിന് മുമ്പ് the examiner is going to ask you 4 introductory questions. As you all know, the first 4 questions are your introduction questions or your intro questions and you should be aware of it, how to answer those questions. So the first one is the examiner will introduce themselves and ask you what your name is. You can simply reply by saying my name is so and so. And that name, the name that you're going to reply should be the name that's in your passport. നിങ്ങളുടെ passportil എഴുതിയേക്കുന്നത് your first, middle, if you have a first and a middle and a last name, or your first and your last name as it's mentioned in your passport. That's the name that you have to give the examiner. Make sure that you use the contractions. That's my names. Instead of my name is, you can use my names is. And this will remind you to use contractions ahead also in part 2 and part 1 is also the warm-up questions and where questions varumbo you will remember that you're going to use contractions and also in the rest of the test, your part 2, that's your cue card or your task card session, and also in your follow-up session. The examiner will then ask you, what can I call you? You can simply say, you can call me by your first name. That would be easier for you, right? So my name is this, but I'll be happy or I'll be glad if you can call me by my first name. Adana idu ende Aditya peru vilicha madi. Now the third question, they will then ask you where you are from. You can just simply state that I am from this place. There is no need for you to give any extra information about your answer at this stage. So here at Tiju's Academy Tiruvalla, when we prepare our students, what I usually do is it's simple. Where do you come from or where do you live? Question it's very simple. So you can just say the place plus your district and the state. That's enough. So I come from this district and in Kerala. So that's it. Simple item vachamadi. And the examiner will finally ask to see your identification, show it to them, and then the test begins. So your identification endana, you all know it's your passport. That's what you're going to register with, and then you move ahead. Once you show your passport, then is when your warm-up session starts. So the second do is create a good first impression. Students often ask if they smile, are friendly, and give the examiner good eye contact, will they get a higher mark? There is nothing in the marking criteria which says that being nice or looking at the examiner in the eye will improve your grades or your scores. However, being confident helps you because it will have an effect on your answers. If you're open and friendly with the examiner, you're more likely to give natural sounding answers. Pretend it's just a normal conversation and you will be fine. So yes, if you are not that nervous and anxious and if you become comfortable, yes, you are going ahead and you are going to deliver your best. So make sure when you practice, you try to ease your nerves. The moment you get in, the moment you get inside the examination room, try to calm down, right? Calm down and just pretend that you are having a normal conversation, a daily conversation with a stranger, and that's all, and it will work wonders. You're going to get a good score. Okay, now the third do, pretend you are interested in the questions. As most of you know, most IELTS questions are really boring, and that's true. I know it, and you guys also know it, that it's really boring. So if you listen to someone answer a boring question, you will notice one thing. Their voice is monotone. That is, it does not go up or down in a pitch at all. It sounds very flat. If you speak like this, you will get a lower mark for pronunciation because one of the crucial factors you will be tested on is intonation. When native English speakers talk, their voice naturally falls and rises depending on how they feel about what they are saying. Similarly, if you pretend that you are interested in what the examiner is saying, your intonations should become more varied. I'm sorry, I think the electricity has gone out, but I'm pretty sure you can see me here now. Yes, it's back now. So I'll just go ahead again. So if you speak like this, you will get a lower mark for pronunciation. Why? Because you have to give stress and intonation on words, your pronunciation. So make sure you are showing those words in an energy. So you should be delivering those words energetically. You should not sound sad and you know when you speak with someone, when you're happy with someone, it shows that you are really happy and it shows in your voice, your intonations, the words or the syllables that you're stressing. So make sure that when you're going ahead, you are giving importance or stressing on the words so that your pronunciation scores also increase. As you remember, ഞാൻ പഴയ live sessions പറഞ്ഞിട്ടുണ്ട്, pronunciation is also one of the criteria where you are judged. So make sure intonations has to be worked with you. Okay, so the next do, extend your answers. But then in warm up, let me just read this for you and then I'll explain how it should work. There is no set amount of words or sentences that you should use in part 1 in the warm-up session. They shouldn't be too short because you want to show the examiner that you can actually use English. So, for example, I am a student. If the examiner is asking you, are you currently working or studying? I am a student is not really a long enough answer. So, for example, if you ask, are you currently working or studying? You can just say, I am a student. I just completed my bachelor's or master's and I'm planning to go abroad for my higher studies. So that's how an answer should go. It should not be too short. Okay. However, they should not be too long either because part 1 is on familiar topics, family, work, hobbies, what you do and what you don't do, right? Your likes and dislikes. And you don't normally talk for 2 minutes when someone asks you where you are from or where you come from. That's very true. Also, you will have lots of opportunities to give long answers in part 2 and especially in part 3, your follow-up session. അവിടെയാണെന്ന് നമ്മൾ ഏറ്റവും long answers കൊടുക്കുന്ന a minimum of say 5 or 6 sentences plus, and also you give an example there. So as a general rule, if you only give a single sentence answer with a single clause like I am from Kerala, then your answer is too short. For example, where do you come from or where do you live? I live in Kerala. So it's a too short answer. So you just need to add a little more, right? So, and I also don't think part 1 answer should even have more than 3 sentences. So somewhere in between is just right. So not too short or not too long, or 2-3 sentences is fine. That's what we should work on. Okay, that's in your part 1 session. Then the last practice is what the last do. You should practice. It's a very bad idea to prepare memorized answers before your speaking test, because part 1 is very predictable. You should practice the familiar topics mentioned above in number 1. So for example, നമ്മൾ ആദ്യത്തെ 4 intro questions അല്ലേ, it's always good that you have practiced it and you know how to answer it, because giving memorized answers is not going to work. So practice it and you know how to answer it, and you can change the vocabularies if you want to during the examinations and in the examination time, during the examination time. Okay, so now we have completed with 5 do's. Now let's move over and see the 5 don'ts of IELTS speaking part 1. Okay, the first don't is give yes or a no answer. Never do that. So don't stop by giving is, for example, if the examiner is going to ask you, do you like ice creams, you're not going to just say yes or a no and stop, right? Always make sure when you're doing that, if it's a small, there are times when there is, but then you need to add some words in it. So it's yes and a no, or and a why. Add that why also, 2-3 sentences namukku theerkanam. You should try to finish it off in 3 sentences maximum. So don't give yes or a no answers. This might sound very obvious, but you would be surprised how many people simply answer with a yes and no. This is probably because many of the questions would naturally lead to a yes or a no answer. But you must remember that you are in a test and you have to show the examiner how good your English is. Giving yes or a no answer does not allow the examiner to judge your ability, and you will get a low mark no matter how good your English is. So yes, ഇത് ഞാൻ നേരത്തെ പറഞ്ഞിട്ടുണ്ട് in part 1. By giving a yes and a no answer and stopping yourself by not elaborating a little is not going to give you good scores. So make sure whenever you get, because most of the answers in your warm-up session, part 1, is always a yes or a no answer at you majority of the time, right? So always make sure when you're practicing at home or any institutes that you go, make sure it should be a yes and why, no and why. That's how it should work. Yes പറഞ്ഞിട്ട് don't stop. After a yes, why is it like that? Why do you feel that? And at least 2 and 3 sentences, that's enough, and you can stop. Likewise with no also. No, I don't like ice creams, because whenever I have ice creams, I catch a cold. I have a sore throat. That's it. That's how you should go ahead with a yes and a why, no and a why. That's how it works for your warm-up sessions. And that's 2 to 3 sentences ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞ പോലെ നേരത്തെ, right? But not just be specific on yes and no. Okay, now let's move over to the next one. What does it say? Going off topic. Yes, this happens a lot. I've seen it even here during our practice sessions. If students practice, I've seen this. Going off topic is the most common thing that most of the students or most of the candidates do. So never go off topic. For example, if you're asked any question, stick to that question and answer that question, rather than running around the bush or running around somewhere else and going off topic. So let's go ahead and read this, and then you'll get a clear idea or a clear picture. Some students try to tell you their life story or the entire history of their hometown when you ask their name and where they are from. Very true. So remember that these are very simple questions, and if you have given more than 3 or 4 sentences, you are probably giving irrelevant details or answers. So answer to the question asked. Yes, this is what happens when a simple question is asked, and this usually happens when you join your during your initial days, when you are not aware how to go about answering your part 1 or your warm-up sessions. This mistake happens during your initial days of your IELTS practice sessions in speaking. ആദ്യത്തെ ആ ടൈമിലാണ് ഇത് usually happens because you're not aware and you don't know how to frame those answers, and that's what happens. You, instead of giving the small details about your place, you start giving longer details which is not relevant to the question, which is not at all relevant to the topic. So make sure you don't go off topic by giving long lengthy answers like 4 or 5 sentence answers here at the warm up session in the part 1, because those answers, the long answers, are needed in your follow up sessions part 3 la. Follow up illa namakku long answers is the option, not here. And that too, there also you should not go off topic. You should talk about what is asked to you. What the examiner asks you is what you answer, right? So make sure whenever you're practicing, you don't go off topic. Always stick to what you've been asked, and in the warm up be very specific. Don't go more than 2-3 sentences. Yes, no, why, your likes and your dislikes, simple questions are all your daily what you do and what you don't do, your hobbies. So make sure you don't go off topic, and this only happens the more you practice, the better you become, and you know which vocabularies and how to pronounce words, and your grammar all comes into place. Okay, now the third don't. Give no as an answer. Fair enough. അവിടെയും അതാണ് പറയുന്നത്. You don't get to choose the question, and if you don't know the answer to a question, or you simply don't like the question, you don't have a choice. You must answer it. For example, if a question is asked to you, is forwarded to you by the examiner, you don't have a choice. You have to answer that question. You cannot say that, I'm sorry, I'm not going to answer this, can you ask me a different question? No, that option is not available for us in IELTS. In IELTS, any question that you ask, you have to answer it. But remember that part 1 is about you. They're going to ask you questions all about you, what you do, what you don't do, and your likes and your dislikes. There'll be no questions you don't understand, because they will all be about you. Simple questions all about you, so you know that how to answer it. All you need is a little practice. If you don't understand one word in a question, yes, we can understand that if the examiner has asked you a question and you don't understand a word in that question, it's acceptable to ask the examiner to explain what that one word means. For example, now, yes, I know you will be anxious. We all will be anxious during that examination. We'll be nervous. So there are times when you are likely to forget, or you likely to hear what the examiner has asked, right? So it's acceptable. So at that time, what happens is, it's also acceptable to ask the examiner to repeat the question. If you didn't quite understand what they said, you can ask the examiner, I'm sorry, I didn't get it. Could you please repeat that for me once again, please? So make sure you are requesting the examiner about that. Please varayana. And once the examiner has again repeated and framed either rephrase the question, make sure you acknowledge that and say a thank you, and then go ahead and answer that question. So, and also in that whole session, you can always ask this once. Do not abuse this privilege and use it for every question. Ella question enakku manasilayilla parangittu, don't do that, right? So that shows that you are not able to grasp English. Ninakku English manasilayilla, you are not able to understand it, right? So it's going to be low scores for you. Only use it when absolutely necessary. Only when you know that you're out, you didn't get it, you're unnu manasilayilla, let me just ask him or her, the examiner. That's fine. Okay, Elsa John is asking me, sir, online and offline speaking test benefits endana? Online and offline speaking test. It's the same idea. It's the same. There is no changes. You have the same session. Part 1 is warm up. Part 2 is your cue card and your task card, and part 3 is the follow. The only difference is online and offline speaking test is, online you will be speaking to a person in front of you, and offline you will have a Zoom or a Skype item നമ്മൾ കമ്പ്യൂട്ടറിൻ്റെ ഫ്രണ്ടിൽ ഇരുന്നിട്ട് you will be seeing that person somewhere else sitting, and he or she is going to ask you the questions. But there is no difference, Elsa. There is no difference in how the pattern or the format and the criteria, everything is same. There is no changes in the criteria. 4 criteria ആണ് നിങ്ങൾക്ക് അവിടെയും ജഡ്ജ് ചെയ്യാൻ ഓൺലൈനിലും ഓഫ്ലൈനിലും. The only difference is in online there will be a person sitting somewhere far away and you will be doing it through a computer over Skype or Zoom, and at the same time offline ആണെങ്കിൽ there will be a person sitting next to you and he or she is going to ask you questions also. Fair enough? Okay, now let's move over to our do's and don'ts. So what happens if you really have no idea? Be honest with the examiner. Tell him that you don't really know and then have a guess. It's not an examination of your knowledge, it's a test of your English. So it is perfectly acceptable to make something up if you're really stuck. So as I mentioned before, and in the slides ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞിട്ടുണ്ട് that here in IELTS, IELTS in IE, that is your English is what is being judged, or you're given scores on your English, right? If there is no right and wrong, they're not checking whether you're able on your knowledge about the question. So if you don't understand or don't know how to answer a question, fair enough, be practical, be straightforward. I need an answer, but let me try to guess. Let me try to answer the way I know it. Fair enough. That is how you should go ahead. But make sure you approach that question and answer that question in whatever way you know. You just cannot skip it. Namakad skip yanala option illa. Okay. Now let's move over to the fourth don't. Speak very quietly. You're not supposed to speak very quietly. Silent and very slow, right? So this is one of the most annoying things for the examiner, because no matter how good your English is, if the examiner can't hear you, he or she can't give you a high score. This has a lot to do with confidence and shyness. Make sure that you are not talking to the floor and speak a little louder than normally. The examiner will also be recording the test, so it has to be loud enough for the recording device to pick up your voice. Try recording yourself and play it back. If you can't hear yourself clearly, then you need to increase your volume of your voice a little more. Very true. So most of the time, most of the examiners, what they do is they are not going to give your scores at the same time when the speaking session is happening. Most of the time they may go back to their rooms and they may do it later after all this, the whole the speaking session they have the recorder placed in the table, right? So what they do is they usually go back to their rooms or wherever they stay, and then they're gonna give you a score. So they'll have to listen to the recording once again and to give a fair score. So it depends, but anyway, the recorder also needs to catch your voice, right? And moreover, the examiner should hear you, right? Examiner no kekanalo what you are saying. So make sure you are audible, not loud but audible, that the examiner can hear you, vice versa. So if he or she can hear you, they are going to judge you properly, and moreover the recorder also needs to catch your voice there. So make sure you don't speak very quietly. You are audible to the examiner and he or she can clearly hear you what you are saying. Okay, now let's move over to the last don't be a perfectionist. The examiner knows that you're speaking a non-native language and does not expect perfection. Even people who get a 9 band score make small mistakes, and people who get band 7 and 8 make quite a few mistakes. If you're constantly thinking about the perfect grammar, vocabulary, it will reduce your fluency and pronunciation. As you know, fluency and pronunciation makes up 50% of your scores or your marks. So there is no point in trying to use perfect grammar and vocabulary. If you are losing half your marks in this process, speak as naturally as possible with a focus on speaking at a natural speed and clear pronunciation, and the grammar and vocabulary will look after itself. It will automatically come over. So make sure you're doing that. Giving too much emphasis on your grammar or your vocabulary is going to hamper your fluency and pronunciation, because you're focusing more on the grammar. Am I saying this right or wrong? Then what happens? Your fluency obstruct. You're not speaking in a fluent way. Your pronunciation is going to go wrong. So forget it. Those things should have been done when you're practicing at home or any institutes. So that's where you should improve your grammar. But when you go to the examination, just be natural, because you know what to do. You have already practiced everything. Be natural and give your best. Okay. So, Elsa, I hope this has clarified your doubt that online and offline speaking test benefits endana. There is no such benefits between online and offline, as I mentioned before. The criterias are the same. You are judged on the same thing, right? The four criterias. അതിലാണ് നിങ്ങളെ judge ചെയ്യുന്ന offline ആണെങ്കിലും online ആണെങ്കിലും. And yes, the only difference is the question, the patterns are also same. The only difference is in online you will be doing through a computer, right? Video call ആയിരിക്കും. At the same time, offline there will be a physically person, a human being sitting next opposite you, and he or she the examiner is going to ask you questions and you have to answer in front of him or her. So that's the only difference, my dear. So hope this session has helped you all, and I'm going to meet you in the next session, in the next live sessions. So till then, take care. Goodbye. Hope all of you are practicing, and see you next time. Thank you. This is Mon Kurin signing off from Tiju's Academy, Tiruvalla. Goodbye.